Hello everyone. Today I am delighted to welcome my next speaker, the concertmaster of LA Philharmonic, Martin Chalifour, and he will join me in a few minutes. Yes, I'm connecting him. Yes, connecting. Good morning
Good
from
morning. How are you?
from St. Petersburg.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here. Do you want the comments on your side to be switched off, or is this okay that they go kind of like this?
Um, you can tell me what they are, maybe.
Yeah, that's fine. Just some people joining us.
Or what the
So
yeah.
so I hope you're having a productive time in the
I am.
quarantine, and
I am.
we'll try to speak about interesting points in your career and about your work in this incredible orchestra that I have been very honored also to visit this summer.
You got,
So
yeah. You came when we were in Scotland, or where did you?
well, at first I was, when you had the Barbican residency in May 2018, but
Yeah.
then this summer I went to a summer school, and me and Sophie from the press, we arranged that I come to review a Hollywood Bowl concert, John Adams concerto. So I
Mhm.
was on the premises. So my question is now, at this point of your career, when you can look both in future and back, could you say, are there different levels in a violinist's career that you can now talk about, that you know that there are certain milestones when you went to the next level?
Hmm. Definitely. In my role as concertmaster, there's several things to learn and to benefit from, um, and they a lot of things are better with age and hindsight and the accumulation of knowledge about repertoire and so on and so forth, of course. But there's also things that you think are the best tools for concert mastering, for leading, and then you learn by your peers, by reactions. You learn that it's some actions are not always necessary. I remember some early years where I knew that my sense of communication while I played was pretty clear and engaged, and because it's something I learned from chamber music, and from chamber music you can expand and relay the same kind of clear messages when you play to other section leaders or to your own first violin sections, for instance. So I learned quickly that the better the orchestra, the less of that they need. And of course, there's also you wonder why lead if there's a conductor there. Well, that's another question entirely. There's a lot of sub leading that needs to
Mm-hmm.
happen. A gigantic, you know, medieval 6,000 soldier army. There's coordination that needs to take place. Uh, so you quickly learn some things like that, that minimizing your where you choose to use body language and those kinds of things. So that's one thing that I learned, and I
Mm-hmm.
felt like, yes, I'm comfortable enough to not be as engaged all the time to be to the point of being a distraction. So, but other than that, the milestones themselves are of course learning to play the violin early and as well as possible. And when you come from a non-musical family like me, that's not so obvious because it catches
Mm-hmm.
people by surprise. So, well, why do you want to do that? Or why do you want to go into music and not have a job and not being able to support yourself and make a living? So there's all these obstacles from traditional families that are not exposed to the arts, the performing arts, and that was my family was such one, and not for lack of appreciating music and theater and paintings, but it was just nothing that ran in the DNA of our family.
Mm-hmm.
So I was encouraged to complete my studies, my regular studies, and even go through what we call Cégep in Quebec province. I was born in Canada, so it's
Mm-hmm.
kind of the equivalent of a professional junior college, and you choose what field you go into, and I chose um, science. So that was my focus until the age of 19 or 20. And then I realized I really had to make a decision before I concentrate on engineering, where I was accepted in Montreal University,
Mm-hmm.
and choosing between that and music. So I chose music, and have not regretted it ever since. I could have gone back.
That's the milestone, yes. Choosing music, that was the big one.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, the first real, because I was in a non-musical family, my progression from the age of 4 or 5 when I started was very slow because I didn't practice. We were practice a few minutes a week,
Mm-hmm.
literally. Even until the age of 11 or 12, I was practicing under 2 hours a week. So it was an hour and 15, an hour and 30, all put together. It was like little coloring, the equivalent of how much coloring do you do or drawing during a week for a child. It was that
Mm-hmm.
kind of occupation. It was fun, but you just pick up the toy. So I had to really use a much more severe incline to my learning curve when I was 12 because I started to like it and learning all these things about rhythm. I remember struggling to decipher a piece of music because we were trained early on to play by ear, strictly, not even looking at music. It was an adaptation of Suzuki method.
Mm.
So,
Yes, I heard about it, yeah.
yeah, which is an excellent method and taught better and better generation after generation. So they
Mm-hmm.
introduced reading quite early, which which is better because otherwise it feels like an obstacle. I said, well, I knew how to ride a bike before, but now I can't because you're giving me black notes and white notes in front of me, and I don't know what they mean.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Play me the recording, and I'll play it back to you. So because you're training a child's ear to be the sole guide in the learning process. So
Mm-hmm.
it's better to introduce all of that early. So those were, a big milestone. At the age of 14, I basically 13, 14, I discovered how my sound could be special and how I could really enter a world of great complexity. And that was so fantastic. And from then on, it was like progress, try to work as much as
Mm-hmm.
possible, convince my family and my parents that maybe I should quit school and, just do music. That was not my idea. I didn't want to, but my conservatory director wanted to. They saw talent. They said, "What could we do with this? We could, profit from a good PR."
But how this identity of a concertmaster has been formed? It seems that you have had this position even before LA Philharmonic.
Yeah.
So it seems there should have been a certain path to this particular position. How did that come about?
Often comes later. That really came much later in life for me. Even during the university years where I ended up being at the wonderful Curtis Institute of Music in
Mm-hmm.
Philadelphia, I was, because I had done science, I was from a non-musical family, I felt like I should just practice and focus on solo playing. So I did not even take orchestra placement auditions, they were not mandatory. They were, in Curtis. So I sat in the middle or the back of the orchestra because I want to learn as much about my instrument, how to play better, and I was focusing on chamber music a lot. We had the best teachers, and it was played on such a high level with your colleagues from Curtis that it was a good learning field. So there I learned I could exploit my freedom, the freedom that I feel I have as one of my qualities to lead chamber groups and to be free from my instrument in a way where I would be, and everybody needs to do that in reality in a quartet situation in chamber music. You need to communicate with your body. So the minute you're stiff and only using your part and you're not really actively participating. So that was my focus. And only at the end, the last 2 months of my school, I don't know how old I was, 23,
Mm-hmm.
maybe. Someone called my teacher at Curtis and said, well, do you have any graduating students that might be interested in an orchestra job? And it was a leadership position. It was for the number 2 concertmaster, so associate concertmaster in the Atlanta Symphony. And my teacher, David Cerrone, said, yes, I know 2 people from my class, and I could recommend them to you. And he told me, and I almost laughed because I didn't take any Curtis audition the concertmaster. I was happy to hear my colleagues do it, and I was getting a good experience. But we worked with great maestros of history. It was Eugene Ormandy had a recording project going with us. We recorded with him, and it was fantastic. Concert with Leonard Bernstein, and so we still benefited no matter where we were sitting. But at the end of those 2 months, I left, and then I said, well, maybe that's something I could do if I can't choose what to do after school, and to go to Europe for a year or two and study some more, like everybody else was doing in the program at Curtis, because they only offered bachelors, so everyone was looking for, maybe we'll form a quartet, we'll do this and that. So we were looking for learning and further studies. So I was too, and the opportunity for the job audition came, and I didn't know much about orchestra auditions, and I said, okay, I'll do it, because it had an interesting list. So for title positions, you just don't play only Mozart Symphony and Schumann Scherzo and Don Juan. They're nice pieces, but you play solos. You play interesting solos from Bach, Johann Sebastian Bach masses, and there were beautiful solos from Tchaikovsky ballets, and things I had heard maybe before. I knew they were beautiful, and playing them was so pleasurable, and learning them. I only had 2 weeks to learn all this. Normally you work for months and months, but I did it because it's so stimulating. And I went to the library. In those days, you didn't have music online, so there was the library had 80% of what I needed at Curtis, and then I had to transcribe the rest by hand. The Bach solo from the Mass, B minor Mass, and the Black Swan solo from the complete score of Swan Lake. Turned out to be the wrong pas de deux. They didn't specify, they didn't specify measure numbers or where in the back was. It was I prepared a much harder one. So I did that in 2 weeks, and had great success at the audition, because I was overly stimulated and, at the top of my form in terms of my schooling. So that was really exciting. It created, the side effect of my starting smoking, because I was like, I had to take a break from practicing, and so I wasn't sleeping much, but I was able to stop eventually.
So we can say that you swam into this position, like easily glided into it.
Well, it was, though, in those days, believe it or not, I was not the top musician in my school, but I had musical talent. I had great understanding from the kind of way my teacher taught me in Canada, and so I was able to be self-sufficient in my learning abilities, and swam into the position, yes. And but in those days, also there was less competition to go into an orchestra overall, and people were afraid to take leadership, to play those solos. They were afraid because they thought it had to be more perfect. You had to be a great violinist to play those solos, maybe, but the tutti things in reality are much harder, because they have to be strict on top of being difficult. And when you play a solo for an audition, for a concertmaster, you can express yourself, you can be free, you can show the colors and everything with much more freedom. So that's what I enjoyed, and that got me in the door of orchestral.
Yeah. Well, you have mentioned sub-leadership, and I actually wanted you to expand on that. What does the concertmaster do in terms of this subtle leadership under a conductor, and how do you fine-tune your role within the orchestra according to a certain conductor?
Well, we typically work on a very very condensed schedule. So there's the priority is given to the conductor to talk during rehearsal. So I have to be able to do a lot of underground operations to coordinate things if there's a need for that during the rehearsal. And it happens all the time with every orchestra, because you get into the reality of the rehearsal. The tempo is a little faster or a little slower than you thought. It gives you too much bow or not enough bow, so you have to quickly say, let's group all these together here, go with this. So a lot of that's done quietly by word of, exchanging the information, or just looking at what the people ahead of you are marking in their music, so it gets filtered back in a subtle way. And at the same time, we all try to listen to that conductor on the podium who's still talking. So everybody does two things at once. And before that, my role as concertmaster is to prepare the music several weeks or several months before, even if it's something that's been played before, that maybe 20 years old, 20 years ago, so that needs a little bit updating, or we get some new critical editions from publishers, and the conductor, it might be a guest conductor, wants to use new material, which means that things that we were doing before in a previous, say, Beethoven Symphony in a Breitkopf edition will be different in a Henley edition, because the scholars study it. They say, no, I think Beethoven's handwriting here means that, not what people used to do. So there's a lot of changes and adapting that needs to take place.
Can you remember now your auditions for LA Philharmonic? What was your repertoire? And if you can remember, what did you feel? And whom did you meet at the auditions? And whether, did you realize that it was a position that will be your life position for future at that point?
I had been in a very serious orchestra for 5 years in the Cleveland Orchestra. And its reputation was impeccable. I learned a lot playing there. So I felt ready to make a change and from the associate concertmaster to concertmaster position. But that thinking that, maybe the next orchestra I join will be very different in level, playing level. But of course, the differences have been getting smaller and smaller between the cultures of orchestras and the excellence. So I found, of course, an orchestra that was in wonderful shape. It was quite virtuosic in Los Angeles. So I got there and I had 2 weeks trial with them of repertoire, and I found that they played really beautifully. So I was not as confident that I would necessarily be offered anything. But I really admired the way everybody played, and I got to do chamber music during those 2 weeks of tryouts. And the way that came about was actually from an invitation, because often the processes of auditions like that drag on for months, if not years, several years, to find a key position for an orchestra. Principal oboe, concertmaster, timpani, the key position that changed the sound of an orchestra a lot. So let me just take a sip of water, but can you repeat the end of your previous question for me?
The previous question, well, to remember the auditions, how did you feel, and whom did you meet? Who made this final decision of taking you?
Okay. Well, it wasn't taken right away. The decision was deliberated later on, but I was invited to be part of the audition process, not through a conventional audition, but by word of mouth, because Pierre Boulez, the famous French actor and composer, was a regular collaborator with me in Cleveland. We even did a La Mer recording together where I was sitting concertmaster. So he was coming every year to do big projects. I was working we had done French music, German music, contemporary, ultra contemporary things, and Mahler symphonies. So I had a really great working relationship with Mr. Boulez. He, unbeknownst to me, he talked to Ernest Fleischmann, the CEO of the orchestra at the time, and said, "Well, I heard you were looking for a concertmaster, and you really have to consider young Mr. Chalifour in Cleveland." So I got a call from Ernest Fleischmann saying, we'd like you to be part of the process. Could you come and play as a guest for a series of concerts? And normally you come for a week or something like that, but he offered me 2 weeks, which was fantastic. It could encompass playing more repertoire and be evaluated, more thoroughly by my peers, my future peers, and also both weeks were with the music director, of course, at the time. It was Esa-Pekka Salonen, and I found that we had a lot of affinity because I loved Stravinsky growing up in Montreal Conservatory. I championed the concerto. That's what I played for my concours. Played the Stravinsky concerto. At that time, nobody was playing it. It was, people play standards like Dvorak, Sibelius, Tchaikovsky, but Stravinsky was a little bit out of the ordinary. And I love the emphatic energy and verve and rhythms and that.
Martin, do you? I can't see you now. The connection. Yes, I can see you now. Yeah. I lost the sound. Wait. No sound. I can't hear you. Wait. Can I disconnect you and then? Just I can't hear you. No sound. No. I can stop it and we can start again.